Not Quite Right features discussions that are unfiltered and uncensored and may include themes that are inappropriate for younger listeners. Also, I swear a lot.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
This is episode 19 of the Not Quite Right podcast. 19th regular episode. I feel like I say this every time, but they're getting fewer and further between, aren't they?
They really are.
I think we're
got
down
a little
to,
bit distracted.
Yeah, I think we're down to like 4 a year.
May I make a humble suggestion that we stop calling them bonus episodes?
I know. It's a bit... I think we should change that terminology because these are actually the bonus episodes.
Yeah, pretty
aren't
much at this point. But like, I've got my little calendar here, which I showed you previously, but I think we need to work on that. I think we need to have a better release schedule next year.
For sure. So on today's episode, we will be starting a gender war.
Yes.
You've been waiting for this moment.
I haven't been waiting. I've been like Rocky style preparing, running up and down the steps, just hurling abuse at men. No, I'm joking. I am overplaying that. I love men, you know, some of them. Hashtag not all men.
You say that now, but your true colours will come out later in the episode.
Yeah.
We'll be discussing an article called The Disappearance of Literary Men Should Worry Everyone about the current state of literature and men. Mm-hmm. And in our Get Wrecked segment, we will be talking about Amanda's novel, Go Big or Go Home.
Yikes.
The time has finally come. Will Amanda be going big or will she be going home? We'll find out later in the episode. Yeah, so we'll get a bit of insight there into your process of writing a novel. Like, how did that start? How did the whole writing process go? How did the editing process go? Up to the stage you are now of trying to get someone to buy the damn thing.
Well, trying to get someone to publish the damn thing first, yeah. So, I mean, I'm sitting on a couch now. I might gradually recline as the episode goes on and just like start sharing all my deepest, darkest thoughts about this process because it is
It's a long, grueling road by the sounds of it.
And it's a sensitive topic.
That'll be interesting information for anyone going down that same path of writing a novel and working out what to do next and then what comes after the next step.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a nice long chat about that. But if you want the TLDR on that, just don't do it. I think it's like, just stop. Stick with flash fiction, far more satisfying.
Here on Not Quite Right podcast, our advice is stop writing.
Just
don't do it.
Every writer knows that that's the better idea. Every writer knows that.
We're not here because we're logical.
No.
So before we get into it, we received a voicemail in our little voicemail system on the website.
Love it.
From Doxy in the Philippines. So let's listen to that message.
Good morning, Ed and Amanda. You can call me Doxy, and I'm from the Philippines. Mabuhay! Actually, on that note, have you had any entrants yet from the Philippines? Because if you haven't, then I'd like to be the first one. But anyways, I've been following your podcast for quite some time already, around 2 weeks or so, listening in on your most recent releases, which are the October long lists and short lists. Very nice stories. And I have to say, I'm really intrigued by what you're doing with the podcast. It's not every day I come across something so creative and uniquely engaging from here in the Philippines. So it's really caught my attention. But before diving in, I'd love some guidance. How do you suggest someone like me who's just starting out, getting interested with your podcast and the contest, gets to know it better? Is there a particular episode or theme I should focus on to first really understand its essence, or should I just start anywhere and let the experience flow? Like, how should I go about that? I'm genuinely excited to connect and learn more. I'd appreciate any advice you can share, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen. It's been Doxy, and cheers.
So thanks, Doxy, for your message. And there have actually been a few entrants from the Philippines, particularly in the first round of the prize where we had 5 or 6 entrants, I believe. But overall, we've had 7 entrants from the Philippines. So unfortunately, you're not the first, but welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Absolutely. And tell your friends. We'd love to have more people from the Philippines join us.
And so you asked where to start. And that's a great question because I often wonder where people do start when they start listening to the podcast. I feel it's a mistake to listen to the first episode and start there because the first episode, I haven't listened to it for years, but I feel like in my mind it's pretty rough. And it's not really representative of what comes later in the
I
podcast?
think you would be surprised to find. I listened to it not that long ago, and it's pretty representative of the kind of shit we talk about. Yeah, like I think if you want to get to know the podcast, start wherever you like. It's a pretty chaotic, rambling conversation. I don't think we've evolved too much from those early episodes. So I would say just start with the episode title that most grabs your attention and see if that's something that you're into. So I guess the other part of that question is, where do you start if you're a new prize entrant? And, there's stuff on the website, there's the podcast, there's all sorts of bits and pieces. There's the stories themselves, that people have entered. There's obviously now the anthology too. And again, you could sort of start anywhere. And I have been thinking to myself, I am a learning and development professional by day, and I have been thinking, look, I need to set something up here for everybody to just...
Like a quick reference
reference guide for people who are coming to it new. So that is on my agenda because I think it is important. I think it can be overwhelming. For those people who've been here since the beginning, there wasn't so much excess of information available. But I think now it would be helpful to sort of guide you. But in the absence of that, while I make that happen, I would suggest probably, it depends on your style, but probably number one, I would always recommend going to the article, How to Win the Not Quite Right Prize, because I think that summary still reflects our collective thoughts and feelings about the main things you need to do to win the competition. But beyond that, if you want to know more about how it all works, you probably need to listen to a long list episode, a short list episode. Anyone will do to get a vibe on how it's going to play out after you've entered. But ultimately, it's just a flash fiction competition. You write a story of 500 words. It's, it's nothing kind of too complicated.
Yeah.
It's the anti-prompt that I think people struggle with. And look, jump on the forum, chat to the other entrants, because every anti-prompt is very different as well. So learning about past anti-prompts is not necessarily going to help you with the current anti-prompt. But talk to the other entrants for sure is probably number one, because they'll be able to guide you through that.
If you go to the website and look at the articles section, there is a section for new entrants in there, a little tab you can click on, and there's about 4 articles there that are of interest to anyone just starting out the prize. So that's somewhere to start.
But look, don't be intimidated, because I don't think you need to go back and listen to every episode or read every article before you jump into this competition, because basically every story is its own unique piece, and that comes from you, and we can't dictate that for you. You're going to have to ultimately, no matter how much you listen to or read, you are going to be the one who has to write a story, and it has to come from you. So trust yourself, basically. Get a baseline information of what we're about so that you've got a little bit of a head start. But then just go for it.
Yeah.
And just see, have a crack, see how it goes, and hopefully you'll be hooked.
Absolutely. So thank you, Doxy, for your message. And if anyone else listening to the podcast wants to leave us a message, please go to the website. You'll see a little sidebar there saying, leave us a voicemail. We'd love to hear from you. And if you leave us a message, we will probably play it on the podcast.
One thing I just wanted to ask you about was your thoughts and feelings on Taylor Swift self-publishing her own book. So did you hear about that?
And tell us what happened.
Well, so news came out pretty quickly, pretty swiftly, you might say. Before the book, it was pretty much on shelves. But basically, Taylor Swift, celebrity author, about as celebrity as they get, decided to self-publish her own book, and she had a exclusive deal with Target in the US at least. I'm not sure what other regions she had deals with or whatever, but that was the deal in the US, and it came out late November, and it sold 1 million copies in the first week.
As you'd expect.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure it's still selling like hotcakes.
What was the book?
Now.
Well, isn't it a biography or is it a...
It's
a children's book, obviously.
No. It's a non-fiction book about the Eras tour.
Okay.
So it's got photos, it's got thoughts from her, it's got some behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, I haven't read it. I've seen some pictures from it and so on.
We've spoken about this on previous episodes as well, what do traditional publishers do? What actually do they do for you? And if you've already got the market, you've already got fans who are willing to buy what you're selling, and she's got the resources there, what benefit would she get from a traditional publisher? And
I mean, I think, speaking for myself, when I aspire to be traditionally published, I'm aspiring for the credibility that will bring, and the kind of the pat on the back, yes, you're allowed in our club. She doesn't give a shit about that club.
She's got that. I mean, she's got her own
credible.
Club.
Yeah, she's credible, exactly. And look, the book itself, it's not a novel or anything. So what credibility can you have on some photos from your tour and your own like insights? Like you're not going to get a Washington Post review or something that's going to be deeply meaningful or validating for you. You know, you're putting out a nonfiction book with photos and it's a coffee table book kind of style of thing. What in that case would a traditional publisher be offering? And apart from maybe like if you didn't have the resources to publish that yourself or I guess the confidence or knowledge to do that, but like Taylor Swift can pay someone to do that.
Yeah.
Like she could open her own bloody publishing house if she wanted to, like in a weekend. So those aren't impediments to her. Target are doing the distribution, right? Like she's made that partnership with them. So Target would be taking a cut of book sales. She's selling them direct from her website, but I believe it's an exclusive deal. So you would imagine it's only available from Target.
Yeah, and so that's also a different model, right? Because like if you're traditionally published, you get into bookstores. So assuming from what you're saying, she's not in bookstores. You can't walk into, I don't know, Dymocks and find her book. Maybe you can in Australia.
Maybe
but
you can in
Australia.
America,
it's Target only. But she's also got the benefit or she's in the position of being sought after, I guess. So if you want her book and people will just seek it out. They'll go to Target
and it's not so hard to get to Target.
No.
I think it's really interesting too, and I think it's heartening for a lot of self-published authors. It feels validating on that side for someone of her level of status to be saying, I don't need the publishers. And in fact, it's going to be a better choice for me to self-publish because, you know, we know there are a lot of hybrid authors out there now who are traditionally published but who choose to self-publish because they want to, A, control the process and B, get a much bigger cut of, you know, the earnings from their books. And I think that's a smart strategy. And there are plenty of authors who are completely self-published and have no interest in being traditionally published. So I think it's validating that model and saying, look, one of the richest people in the whole world is saying, yeah, this is a good approach.
Yeah, but it's also not the kind of thing that everyone is going to be in the position of doing.
Absolutely.
Right? So she's in a special position. And from what I know about Taylor Swift, I don't know all of the ins and outs of this, but didn't she have a issue with her recording company? She re-recorded all of her albums and released like Taylor's version. So this is very much
on
like
brand.
on brand for her.
She likes control.
Yeah, so it's control, it's owning all of your products and
But she's an artist, right? I get that. It's not just I'm putting out widgets, you know, she's putting out her art, and to feel like that is not under your control would be pretty rough, I think. People putting out a message that's not really yours. I mean, I don't think this coffee table book is her art as such.
Yeah.
But certainly from the music point of view, I can understand why she would want control over that.
Yeah. And so we talk about like what is the point of traditional publishing, and more as we go down this path of where things are headed. And like we've just published our own book, you know, and that's not traditionally published, but we still have distribution via a number of third parties and we sell it ourselves on our website. So that stuff is possible and it's available to everyone basically already. So if you don't need a publisher as an independent individual author and you also don't need a publisher as like a major celebrity, who are the authors that publishers are trying to get? You know, where is their market and what value do they add?
Well, this is what's interesting because guess what? All of the publishers have bloody published Taylor Swift books. They're just unauthorized ones.
Yeah, right.
You know, they create their own books. I've seen ones where it's like, and I don't know how they get away with it, to be honest. Like, I don't know what legalities there are behind that, but I've seen like books where it's a cartoon version of Taylor Swift and it's like her life story. And, you know, there's other nonfiction books out there that publishers are doing, like Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, for example, where they're telling like the life stories of women who have had these successful careers or have otherwise like made their mark on the world. And, you know, there's an illustration to go with it. Like that's the kind of book that they're producing, like sort of a nonfiction book targeted at little girls. And then there are other books which are like looking at her fashion, for example, or whatever niche it might be. So they are doing this and they are approaching other celebrities who maybe don't have quite the same audience that Taylor Swift has. Like they wouldn't just guarantee they're going to sell 1 million books in a week, who maybe need the publisher distribution network, like to get into Target, to get into the bookstores and so on. I sent you a reel today of Schmidt from New Girl and he's released some kids' books.
Yep.
And it's just another, like every day I feel like there's another celebrity author pumping out shit, basically. Like, there are some celebrity authors out there who are authors. Like, these people are artists. They might be an actor, you know, they're an artist in that sense. And often artists have complementary skills in other forms of art. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's like a blanket rule that these people can't do it. But obviously there's a lot out there that's either A, ghostwritten, or B, just crap, you know, and people are buying it just because of who it's attached to rather than the book itself. So publishers are still very much like onto that. And seems to be like, that's all they care about. Like, I know that's not true, but it feels like it. Like, that's what I'm seeing every single day, a new celebrity author. And it's like, well, is that just all this is now?
I think it is in a way, because that's what, like, it's a name. They need a name to get behind it for people to pay attention and want to buy it. Otherwise, they've got to market it and they've got to try and sell people on
God
it.
forbid they fucking market something.
It's the same as happening in, you know, movies, and we just get sequel after sequel. It's the same
Marvel,
thing.
Another Marvel movie, spin-off after spin-off. It's boring. It's so like, I want to see something new. And even the movies that aren't the latest Marvel movie, it's a book adaptation or like can't we just take a risk? I don't know.
It's also, I find it interesting as well with writing that we have that kind of culture. It's also like the nature of the product is that you can have something ghostwritten for you and you can just release it and say, this is mine, in a way that you can't do with other things. Like, imagine if Jamie Oliver just came out and was like releasing an album, and he releases like an album, and that's clearly you didn't write the songs and record the songs and play the instruments. You can't just put out an album that clearly isn't yours. But we accept that with
Milli
writing.
Vanilli did it, didn't they?
Yeah. They were way ahead of their time. Now that wouldn't even, no one would bat an eyelid about that these days.
Yeah, no, you're right. What is it about books? I find that so bizarre because it is so dishonest.
Yeah, and
it's
we just
like
accept
false
it.
advertising. It's fully false advertising. So another one I saw recently was Dylan Alcott, who is famous in Australia. He's a Paralympian amongst like 30 other bloody things. He's a former Australian of the Year. He is a wheelchair user and he's prominent in media. And he's released a kid's book, but like, it doesn't even say it's by him. He's like, Dylan Alcott presents.
Yeah. What does that mean?
What it means is it has his head on the front and that is it. And it's about a kid in a wheelchair, you know, and I find that just so frustrating. Like it's
basically a celebrity
just bullshit.
endorsement. It's like Dylan Alcott presents cornflakes, you know, in an ad, which is fine. But that's clearly an ad.
Yeah.
And that's what that is with a book.
Yeah, we need to move it to a model of like, sports endorsements where, okay, I get it. Like you're getting paid a shitload of money to wear Nikes and cool. You're cool. I want to be cool like you. I'm going to go buy Nikes. Great. Good deal. Not I made them.
Yeah.
And it's my brand.
Yeah.
Like, come on. I mean, it really grinds my gears, as you can see. I think, like, obviously, as someone who aspires to traditional publication, it bothers me because I feel like the goalposts just keep moving and it feels almost impossible to break in. But it's also just frustrating on a human level. Like, I hate the fact that there's never a movie I want to go and watch. I hate the fact that these books are just being churned out as if we're all just cattle and it doesn't matter and we just give them their swill and like nobody's going to care. Like I do care. I want art. Like I want that experience, that connection with people. And I've said this a million times. I'll say it a million more. But like capitalism and art don't mix. Like and that's the problem because they're just trying to make money off it. So it becomes like a widget, right? Like we're just producing widgets here in the publishing industry. Like no, that's not what it should be.
Yeah, it has to be like the minimum that a lot of people would pay for. Like, you know, that's the lowest common denominator idea is that you have something that is so bland, inoffensive, that is kind of a little bit interesting to a lot of people. So you get millions of people to buy it, but it's worthless.
Yeah.
You know?
Like I think we probably just need a model where, and these models exist, where you have like a poet laureate and these types of things where this person is funded to write purely because the art's important.
Yeah.
I think that's a better model than having to try and market things. And anyway, I could like cry about this all day long. It's not going to change. So
yeah, it sounds like sour grapes to me.
I mean, it is a little bit.
No, I mean, look, everyone's fed up with it. Everyone's fed up with the same movies, the same sequels. When was the last time there was like a new musical act that wasn't just like a derivative kind of whatever? But like the good art is still out there. It's just so overwhelmed by like the marketing of the crap, and that goes for everything. And that's why people are moving a lot to new media like podcasts and, for better or for worse, abandoning mainstream media and mainstream news and that kind of thing, because it is just like the same and very filtered and inauthentic. And I think people sense that inauthenticity about that kind of media, and they crave, like, give me something that's real. Like, we're all here. We spend our 9 to 5 days grinding it out. It's shit. We've got like families. We've got like all of these things that we worry about in our lives, and you're selling us this bland garbage. Give us something that we can
sink our teeth
give us
into.
something real, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, Taylor Swift self-publishing her own book does not really solve that problem.
It doesn't. No, it does not. So, Amanda, I came across this article in the New York Times. It's called "The Disappearance of Literary Men Should Worry Everyone." And it was published on December 7th, 2024. And it was written by a man named David
What a
J.
shock.
Morris.
Men are usually the first to complain about being cancelled and
I
such.
haven't even introduced this topic and you're already on your high horse. So that's a taste of things to come. So David Morris is a creative writing teacher at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And I came across this article on Reddit and on 2 different Reddits, and kind of there was a lively discussion. And it's a short article, and I have to say, like, it's not that deep really, like the article and the opinion analysis on it. But I thought it would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
And, you and I have had some heated discussions in the past when the microphone is off about these kinds of topics. And I don't necessarily want to like bring all that baggage into the podcast, but,
I'll try and restrain myself.
And no, don't do that. By all means, let loose. And I don't think we're going to like get to the bottom of it, of this topic, because it is such a short article. I'm just going to read through it piece by piece. And I've also selected some comments from people who've left comments on the article and also on Reddit. And I thought we could talk about it that way. So the article begins, "Over the past 2 decades, literary fiction has become a largely female pursuit. Novels are increasingly written by women and read by women. In 2004, about half of the authors on the New York Times fiction bestseller list were women and about half men. This year, the list looks to be more than 3/4 women. According to multiple reports, women readers now account for about 80% of fiction sales."
So hang on, you started there by talking about the writers, and then it just flips to fiction sales then too. So, I mean, those are 2 very different things. So if you're saying 80% of fiction sales are women, and then what was it, like 3/4 of the New York Times
so this
list?
is the introductory paragraph. So he's saying in 2004, it was 50-50, and in 2024, it's 3/4 women, so 3 to 1. And readers, it's 4 to 1. 80% sales, right? And so, like, let me start by saying that these are the author's numbers. I'm not sure what kind of rigor has been put across those numbers. I did some Googling to try to validate that, and numbers I've seen are all over the place. Like, sometimes they're close, sometimes they're more 50-50, and it really depends on A, the source, and B, all of the factors that go into kind of this information. Like, are you looking at all of the books that are available in the shop, because they have authors that go back 100 years kind of thing? Or are you looking at
New releases.
Yeah, new releases. Are you looking at traditionally published versus self-published? Are you looking at like established authors versus new authors?
Yeah.
And I think the point of this article is like new authors.
The ones that make it to the New York Times list, basically.
Yeah, and the author of this being like a teacher who teaches creative writing, and saying like from his class it's overwhelmingly female. And from our experience as well, our listenership and participation in the comp as well is also somewhere around 70%, like 2/3 female. And, we went to the Coast Write dinner the other night, right? The local writers group, and that was also similar type of situation. So I think anecdotally and in our experience, I think that this idea is reflected, even if the numbers, like whatever the numbers are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by those numbers. But I think I've read the article. It wasn't the best written article I've ever read. And there's some sort of ideas all tossed in together there. And another idea that's tossed in, just in that pretty much first sentence, I think, was he mentions literary fiction, right? Which is very different to just fiction. So you can't say the New York Times bestseller list is all literary fiction. It's definitely not, right? I mean, as compared to, say, a prominent prize for literary fiction. Like, let's look at that if you're going to talk about literary fiction. Let's look at those prize winners, these ones that everybody decides are like the ones that we must all look up to. So I think there are a few confused ideas in there. But like you say, like as an idea that maybe women are overrepresented in fiction writing and potentially readership and so on. I think we can agree on that. That's clearly true.
There are plenty of different ways to slice this, and there are prizes, as you say. There's also sales, and you're right. He's conflating a lot of different ideas here. So yes, literary fiction versus
like genre fiction,
but also I think non-fiction authors are somehow in statistics as well. So there's a lot of different compartments and groups of people that are being overlaid here. And let me say, like at the outset here, I don't agree with everything that's being said in this article, and it is an opinion piece. But what I found interesting was not only kind of the ideas that are thrown up by this article, but also the responses of some of the people in the comments and how people perceive these ideas. And the author, as we'll get into, draws some correlation between this and also other social movements, I guess. So we'll get into that as well. So the article continues. I see the same pattern in the creative writing program where I've taught for 8 years. About 60% of our applications come from women, and some cohorts in our program are entirely female. When I was a graduate student in a similar program about 20 years ago, the cohorts were split fairly evenly by gender. As Eamon Dolan, a vice president and executive editor at Simon & Schuster, told me recently, the young male novelist is a rare species. Male underrepresentation is an uncomfortable topic in a literary world otherwise highly attuned to such imbalances. In 2022, the novelist Joyce Carol Oates wrote on Twitter that a friend who is a literary agent told me that he cannot even get editors to read first novels by young white male writers, no matter how good. The public response to Ms. Oates' comment was swift and cutting, not entirely without reason, as the book world does remain overwhelmingly white, but the lack of concern about the fate of male writers was striking. I think this is like something we hear about, right? The publishers are looking for diverse writers, diverse characters, which, we can all agree is a good thing. But that also generally means exclusive of men.
Well, I mean, I actually sort of feel that that's probably true. Like, I think if we're talking traditional publication, which I feel like we are, there is a push now to get stories out there for underrepresented or traditionally underrepresented groups. And I think that that's important work that needs to be done. Like, not forgetting that we've still got all the old books. There's a lot of catching up to do, you know. So this guy's going, back in the good old days, it was 50-50. Sorry, what was it before that? Before women fought tooth and claw to make it 50-50, what was it before that? And now, how many white males are there? Like, what's the percentage of white men in society? And is that reflected in the books? It probably is. It probably is.
When you say probably is,
well, I mean,
we're talking about, numbers like 3/4 and 4/5. And how is that representative of?
Well, I mean, not male to female necessarily, but as a section of society, are white men 50% of society? No. So they shouldn't be.
But men
50%. Okay, and that's a valid point. But I guess we're working back from where they were 100%. You know what I mean? And finding a place where everybody is represented. I don't want to not hear the voices of men. I think it's important. And in fact, I really, as much as I like to go off about these things because I have a feminist viewpoint, but I actually think there's a lot of disenfranchisement going on right now, which is really problematic. And we see that happening with incel culture and red pill culture and so on, that men are fighting back because they're feeling disenfranchised. And I think that that's an issue. And I think that men and young men do lack positive role models in a lot of ways. And so they go searching for answers maybe in what I would consider very much the wrong places, in places that are unproductive. So I wouldn't want to silence men, right? But I think if white men are still representing 25% of, literary culture, that's probably still too much. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's like you get people who complain about being cancelled. And they're like, I'm being silenced as they speak to the world on social media. You're not being silenced. You're just actually experiencing what everyone else fucking experienced forever, which is it's really hard to get in when there's another group who seem to have a foot in the door. And I think at the moment, I do think certain diverse groups do have a bit of a foot in the door from the perspective of that's what traditional publishers are looking for. And so if that's what you've got, you've still got to do a good job, but you sort of got a little advantage because of affirmative action. You've got an advantage. It's a whole thing about affirmative action. You could go down that whole path. Not everybody agrees with it. I believe it's necessary. But like, I feel like it's interesting that when white men have their privilege taken away, they feel like they are being attacked. It's like, no, you're just being given the same standard of treatment that everyone else has, which is you no longer have an unearned advantage. You are just you, and you've got to do a good job, and you've got to write a good book, and then maybe we'll take you on. But we don't just care about you because of you're a white man and because you've got connections and because, you know, that's the way things have always been. You've actually, as an individual, got to make your own way now.
So you brought up a few points, and one of them, I guess, to tie these together, the idea that like men, and in particular white men, have had like this dominance over time in the past, and it was, you know, a huge overwhelming dominance and advantage. And we can all agree on that and agree that like that needs to change, and it has changed, and these other voices are coming through. And you also said that like white men are now seeing the same kind of treatment that other groups have had in the past, which to me, I mean, as a side comment, like you acknowledge that kind of treatment is wrong. And then you're saying like now that you're seeing it is
I'm saying that
not wrong?
Well, no. Okay. So I think affirmative action is necessary to correct an imbalance, right? I don't think an imbalance just naturally corrects, like certainly not at any level of speed. So in an industry, for example, where there's a very overwhelming advantage for one group, the only way to resolve that is affirmative action, because otherwise the decision makers remain in that privileged group and the decisions don't really change. And that's happening. And we see that with publishers putting out specific call outs for authors who are of colour or who, you know, own voices, these kinds of things that they're actively seeking and prioritising for the time being, which I think is necessary for correcting a historical imbalance, right? We're seeing more stories for, I should say, as well, people who have diverse sexuality and diverse life experiences and so on. And I think, A, that's necessary, and B, it's beautiful. We want these diverse stories. So there's that going on. And I can see, like, even myself, I find that frustrating at times because there's these prizes and awards and things that are open only to groups which don't include me. And, you know, sometimes it's socioeconomic, sometimes it's race-based, sometimes it's gender or sexuality-based, whatever it is. But yeah, like what many people would call reverse discrimination, which I call affirmative action. And I think that's necessary for correcting a historical issue. Separately to that, right, if we're talking about men in general finding it harder to get their voice heard, not so much because of those initiatives, but just in general, they're feeling like, for example, in that course that this guy runs, that's not an affirmative action issue. That's applications, right? The applications are overwhelmingly from women and fewer men. So that's got nothing to do with that idea. We're just seeing less men get involved in the industry or finding it difficult to crack in, whatever that might be. And I feel like in those cases, men who have traditionally held privilege feel like they're being attacked. They feel like they're being disadvantaged when in fact they're just being leveled out, right? We all have the same disadvantage. It's hard for everyone, and you just didn't realize that because it wasn't so hard for you before. And now it's harder for you, and you feel like someone's taken something away from you, and they have in a way, but that thing that they've taken away is something that you were the only one who had. And so I guess it's those two things. And what I have a problem with is this idea like, oh, woe is us, like, oh, no one cares about us, and like we're getting stripped of like our ability to do anything. No, it's just hard for everyone. It's just shit. Ask anyone.
So like, I want to push back against a couple of those ideas because, I mean, look, what we sometimes do is conflate, you know, these ideas of groups versus individuals. And we're talking about like, okay, traditionally men have had this advantage, and you're talking about this advantage being taken away from men as a group. But, I mean, if you picture in your mind a 20-year-old writer, so a young man who has come out of school with aspirations to be a writer, that person has never had the advantage, that historical advantage that you're talking about. So when you say like we have to overcome these historical advantages, absolutely, and we should have this equal opportunity, but that person is now being marginalized, right? And we can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's the case.
But I don't think that equates to marginalization. That's what I'm saying. I think that men view it as marginalization. They're like, hang on, you're now excluding me from the gang. Like, no, you still have just as much of a terrible, horrible, very slim chance of getting in as everyone else now. there are some circumstances where, yeah, you're not going to be invited to apply for that grant, or you're not going to be invited to apply for that prize because you don't fit the criteria, because that's an affirmative action piece that's going on the side. But that's not all publishers are doing. You know, these are initiatives publishers are taking to give a leg up to own voices and giving a leg up to traditionally marginalised groups, push those and make sure that those voices are heard. But otherwise, outside of that, it's a level playing field. If you've got a great manuscript and it's what the publisher's looking for and it fits, you know, all the bloody miracles that have to happen to get you seen by a publisher, it is a level playing field. I mean, I guess Joyce Carol Oates, you know, anecdotal evidence, maybe, I don't know, maybe that is the case. But I feel like if you come in with the right manuscript, they're not going to say, oh, you're a white male, we're not going to speak to you. That doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? If they think you're going to be marketable, if they think that you're going to make them money, they'll offer you a contract. And maybe, like, percentage-wise, maybe it takes some of their attention, and so therefore those groups are getting a leg up. And I think they are. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think affirmative action is happening, and I think that's necessary to address a historical issue. But the door is not closed to anyone else.
No, I'm not saying the door is closed, but I guess what you're saying, and I agree, is that there is discrimination there, right? Whether, you know, you frame it as positive discrimination or whatever, it is there to some extent. And you frame it as in we're overcoming historical inequities, which is absolutely true. But just to return to the foundation of this article and the foundation of this discussion is that discrepancy of 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 against men. So when you talk about overcoming historical inequities, at what point have we done that?
Well, it's not yet.
So you think, but like honest question, 4-to-1 female over men, is that not overcoming historical inequity?
Well, if you look at all the books in the bookshop, like all the books that have ever been written, no, not yet. Well off it.
No,
right?
but I'm looking at authors because here's what I feel, you know, that every generation of artists has the right to express their art and to be seen equally, whether they're male or female or other genders or whatever, you know, you have that opportunity. But if it becomes like we have a conversation like, actually, no, you don't have that right because what we're trying to do here is make up for previous generations, I think that's a problem. So I don't think you should punish people who have just arrived on this world and say like, oh, because other people had an advantage before you.
But again, you keep describing it. This is exactly what I'm saying. You keep describing it as punishment. It's not punishment. It's just the same as everyone else.
But you've said that there's discrimination.
There is discrimination happening at a level, I agree. And there are these initiatives that are happening to propel people who don't have some of the other advantages, by the way, like historically family wealth. And I'm not saying like that every white man has that, right? But as a like percentage or whatever, like these initiatives are helping advance people who have disadvantages, right, to getting in. And I guess it's perceived that these men don't have those same disadvantages. By the way, there are initiatives for like socioeconomic reasons that men would be invited to apply for, right? And that disadvantages someone who's got the money, but they've already got the advantage. So it's like...
But I'm not talking about that. We're talking about men versus women and the fact that we've got 4-to-1 women versus men or 3-to-1 or whatever the case is.
So the other point, I guess, the big point that's underlying this is, do the men fucking want to do it? And I don't think they do because, or in the same numbers, right? You have just mentioned earlier our Coast Right group and we went out for a Christmas dinner and there was like, what, maybe 16 of us, something like that, and that you were one of 2 men there. And that's probably pretty reflective of that group in general, about how many men would be in attendance. That's completely optional. There is no sign on the door that says men can't join at all, right? And I'm sure the men in the group would love more men to join. All of us would, right? Because it's lovely to have a mix of different people in the group. So what's that about? Like, that's not discrimination, right?
Interesting that you say that. And because the article does go into this as well, so I'd like to talk about. But I mean, just to, I guess, to address that point, we talk about women in STEM and women in other fields where they're not equally represented. And we look at what the causes of that are and we try to encourage that. And we say, well, maybe there are barriers, maybe there are obstacles, and maybe there are reasons why they're not equally represented in those fields. Let's try to overcome them and get them up to parity. So I think there's a bit of like a, you know, double standard that we would say to men, well, why aren't you just doing it? Why don't you just, if you wanted to, you would, kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I'm not the boss of women in STEM, right? Like,
No, I'm just
these are
saying-
initiatives that people do. And look, I'm not against that. I think if that's something that someone believes strongly in and they want to see more young men embracing the literary world, I'm all for that. I think that would be wonderful. I think that would be very healthy. And that doesn't mean, and you all get a publishing contract, by the way.
No.
This is very different, right? This is saying we want men to engage in this art form. What are the barriers? What are the impediments? What are maybe some of the reasons, like coming from within the men themselves, that they might not want to or feel like they fit in, or any of these, whatever it might be? Sure, go nuts. But that's not the same as like, let's publish all their books. That's just look, let's open the door. Let's make sure their voices are heard.
I guess what I'm trying to point out and what I want to state as my position in this discussion is that we, as a culture, do make this assessment about where there is inequality. And here is an example of where there is inequality against men, right? You know, specifically, I'm not going to say race or whatever, but just against men. And whether that's caused by whatever factors it may be caused by, I think it's important still to look at those factors and say, well, is there a problem? You know, how can we get things back to parity, or at least like have a discussion? Because it may be like, hey, men don't really want to do this, whatever, but that is not the same discussion that we have when we look at other areas of inequality where women are not fairly represented. We say, well, hey, maybe we should look at what the factors are and try to fix that problem. I just want to have the same discussion about men in this area.
It could be intimidating. I imagine coming to even our Coast Right thing, it could be quite intimidating for a young man to be like, oh, there's all these middle-aged women here.
Yeah, and look, it's the same kind of thing we speak about women like trying to get into these fields. I'm just, I'm not here for the gender war. I'm preaching.
Even though you specifically
I'm preaching here for like, let's help each other out. We're all here together. It's not men versus women. It's men and women together trying
in
to
harmony,
form like a productive society. So that's all I'm getting at.
You would say that.
It's not a zero sum game. Like men and women together thriving. That's good for everyone, right? So the article continues. To be clear, I welcome the end of male dominance in literature. Men ruled the roost for far too long, too often at the expense of great women writers who ought to have been read instead. I also don't think that men deserve to be better represented in literary fiction. They don't suffer from the same kinds of prejudice that women have long endured. Furthermore, young men should be reading Sally Rooney and Elena Ferrante. Male readers don't need to be paired with male writers. So I've got a little bit to say about this paragraph specifically. There's a few comments there, a few statements that rub me the wrong way. So the first one of them is, I don't think that men deserve to be better represented in literary fiction because they don't suffer from the same kind of prejudice that women have long endured.
I don't understand what that point is.
Well,
what's he saying?
I think he's saying like women and other groups have suffered more, therefore they should be more heard.
But is he also saying like, we may not be getting your individual voice, but we've got the message, mate. We've got the message from your group.
What you're implying there is...
I'm asking. It was a question.
No, I guess like in the way that you phrase that is that, we've heard from men. We know what they have to say. But like, okay, but each new generation has different things to say.
Yeah.
And even if they just do have the same thing to say, let them fucking say it.
Well, look, they can say it. And this is the other thing, like with cancel culture. I'm being cancelled and no one can hear me, I say, from my like platform of multiple
That's
tens of thousands of followers.
Yeah.
Like no one's stopping men from having a voice, I guess. No one's stopping anybody.
No.
In fact, now more than ever, everyone's got a soapbox. No one is being silent. Well, I mean, that's a sweeping statement, but these people are probably not being silenced, right? They're just not being given that traditional publishing platform is what he's saying. If they're not making it to the New York Times bestseller list, I mean, the other possibility is that they're just not as good as the women who
that's
made
always
it.
true.
That's also a possibility, but no comment on that. I don't have all the books in front of me. But like, you're not being silent. Like, I think the issues are more around, do you feel like you want to be part of this? And maybe they don't, because guess what? They can go make more money in STEM.
But look, we will get to that. So the other thing, I just want to make the point, the other thing that I wanted to call into question is the statement, furthermore, young men should be reading Sally Rooney and Elena Ferrante. Male readers don't need to be paired with male writers. And I don't entirely disagree. Absolutely, we should be seeking to read diverse writers. And I've read several Elena Ferrante novels, but do we not have discussions about representation and tailoring books for certain groups and saying, okay, we need to see these characters, we need to see these kinds of stories that might appeal to certain groups. Whereas for men, we say, oh, but you should just be reading what other people like and being okay with that.
No. I think they're saying, I think what the article's saying there is we should not assume that men should have to read books by men. In fact, men should be reading all sorts of books, including books by women, and we shouldn't assume they can't read them. I think that's what that's saying because there's this, and I mean, if we look at the younger age group, right, go to a fucking toy shop. There's a pink aisle and a fucking green aisle or whatever, and it's boys and girls. And that's how things are marketed. And in children's books, it's very much always been marketed that way. And it is only now that we're starting to get a push and to see more people actually really actively trying to write books which will appeal to both audiences, but which have both male and female characters in them. I think that's a really important movement. I actually think young men have been robbed of that. I think there is a lot of insight to be gained about stories about other people, whether that's women or not, but in this specific case, about girls their age. What are girls their age thinking? Let's see the story from their perspective. I think there would be a lot of insight gained that way. And I think what the article is saying there is not men should be forced to read women's books. It's not that at all. It's that we shouldn't assume girls' books aren't for boys is what they're trying to say.
That's absolutely true. But I want to acknowledge that as a literary culture, we have acknowledged that representation is important. And this is a question of engagement, right? So if we say, well, why are men not reading and writing? And one of the factors could be that people are not writing to them. And we've said that that's a problem in the past for women and for other groups, they might not have an interest in certain, movies or books because the stories haven't been about them or the stories haven't been for them. So they're disengaged. They don't care. And I think that, we should be writing to men and we should be writing to women and blah, 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 let all these voices be heard and let these markets create themselves and everyone is happy. The comment of male readers don't need to be paired with male writers, I think is true, but it's also missing a point that we still do need to write for men. And look, there's a few commenters who have said things along the same lines. So Bolgini from Twitter says, the large majority of literature I read is over 30 years old. Most of the new stuff isn't really interesting or marketed towards me. And Jack from Kansas says, these young men need better stories as long as they're told through, and this is going to offend you, as long as they're told through the feminist prism, you still don't get it. Men seek stories where masculinism isn't denigrated as being inferior, undesirable or toxic. Until that representation is re-established in literature, we'll happily live within the margins and seek our narratives elsewhere. So, look, I mean, say what you want about that comment, but definitely when you're not giving men stories that they can connect with, the outcome of that is that fewer men read.
Well, I don't know, this might shock you, but I actually agree with that, right? I really strongly believe that young men don't have enough positive male and masculine role models. What is modern masculinity? And I think the thing is that modern masculinity is maybe a little bit different to what traditional masculinity has been, right? We can't walk around beating women over the head with our clubs or whatever. That's just not how things are done anymore. But that's not to say that there aren't traits that are traditionally associated with men and masculinity that are valuable in the world. There really are. And I think there are some things that men are innately programmed to do or built to do that are really positive things. And I don't want to overcomplicate things and suggest only men can do these things. And that's the problem, right? When we start sort of putting things in a pigeonhole and saying only men do this thing and that's masculinity, because that excludes people who also do that thing. And I think that's where we start to see problems. But there are wonderful things about masculinity. It creates a balance and harmony. We're talking about men and women living in harmony in the world. I think we can. And I would like to see that. I love to see positive male role models in the world. I love to see men who are confident in themselves, who show young men how you can be in this world and how you can be a man and a good man. And I think there are some really fucking toxic things that have been traditionally seen as a sign of masculinity and a sign of manhood that need to change so that men can be free of that shit.
Yeah. And so we talked about one reason as to why engagement might be lower is, the establishment is against men. That's one potential reason, right? The literary establishment doesn't want to hear men's story. That's one option. The second option or contributing factor is that stories aren't being written for men, so they're disengaging. The third factor brought up by this article, and I guess it's more also the comments. So we've got a comment here from RMT in Gainesville, Florida. I suspect a lot of younger men feel that they're receiving messages that it's not manly to go to college, to read, or to practice other arts.
That seems like that's the underlying fear, but that's propelling this article more so than an idea that men are being directly targeted and prejudiced against, that in fact it's being seen as something that's not manly and therefore not appealing.
Yeah, and I don't know if manly is the right word, because I think if you're a writer and whatever, like no one's going to say, ooh, that guy's not manly. But there are like a lot of societal forces here. And so we do see lower male engagement in intellectual pursuits in general. Like I think young men are focused on like, how can I make money? That's one thing. We've got this manosphere, and the pundits, the voices that we hear, like the Joe Rogans and the Jordan Petersons. It's a very anti-intellectual view of things, and those guys are not.
I would say Jordan Peterson is a pseudo-intellectual
100%.
But yeah, like it's promoting this culture of like alpha male shit, basically. Like to be a real man, you just have to like step on everyone around you and be top dog kind of thing.
Yeah, and so Devon from San Jose says basically reading doesn't make money and writing literary fiction doesn't make money, and that's one of the factors.
Yeah, like we're all mad. What the hell are any of us doing? And maybe there's more pressure on men to be financially secure than there may be on women. Like traditionally, certainly that's the case. And I wonder too, like if these are women doing these courses, like how many of them are women with young families who are trying to connect with creativity as fulfillment as opposed to like pursuing a career kind of thing. Like there's so many factors that come into it that have nothing to do with like being anti-men or whatever. Like if anything, I feel like women are just flocking to it, I would suggest, more so than like men being disenfranchised. It's like women have found this outlet, and maybe by nature of flexible work conditions, by nature of like traditional gender imbalances in terms of who's the breadwinner in a family, for example, these factors might come into play and encourage women to do these financially stupid things like try and write a novel, right? There's no way of knowing, I suppose. And what you're sort of suggesting is that maybe we need to find out. And that's cool. I'm not going to do it. But like I support someone else who can be bothered going to do the research and figure it out. Like more writers, please. Like I'm all for that. I don't want anybody to not be heard. Oh, except maybe Jordan Peterson.
Each episode, Amanda and I take turns recommending each other books or movies that we may not have chosen for ourselves. It's a segment we call Get Wrecked. And today, Amanda's wrecking herself.
Big time.
She neglected to check herself.
And not for the first time, but it's probably going to be the worst time.
So this is going to be a little bit different to our normal Get Wrecked segment, because normally we have a piece of media that's out there that our listeners presumably have listened to, or at least had the opportunity to listen to or watch or read. In this case, no one's read her book apart from...
Right.
Well, it's not for sale. It's not available out there yet. It will one day be available and a bestseller, presumably.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But for now...
Isn't every book a bestseller now?
Yeah. So, like, I'm very conscious that our listeners will not have read it, and therefore we have to explain things. But I think what is going to be a little bit different this time around is that we're not just, I guess, critiquing the content of the book, but we're talking about the whole process, your whole process about how you came up with the idea, how you wrote the book, which is a huge achievement to write a full novel, complete novel, the editing process, and then like what happened next. So this is very interesting, I think, for people like myself who haven't written a novel and want to know how it's done.
I think it'll also be really fun for the daredevils, don't you?
Yeah. Well, this is a...
taste of my own medicine.
Exactly.
Oh, it's bitter.
And I can see you're a bit nervous, so we'll try it. We'll take it easy.
It's all right. Look, I can actually hack it. I really can. Because whatever you say cannot be worse than what I say to myself.
You'll just go home and cry later.
No, I promise you, I've thought worse and I continue to think worse. So it's all good.
We are always our own biggest critics. That's true.
But you do feel exposed, don't you? Anytime your work's out there, and it's hard.
All right. So the book is called Go Big or Go Home.
Can I just interject and say that's a working title that I don't like. So that's a good start.
Okay, so we do critique other people's stories and titles are one thing that we talk about. And here's your title. And like as a title, it is a cliche.
Yeah,
right?
it is. Exactly. And it's been called other things, this book, along the way. And because it's not finished, like it's not really at its end point yet, I don't exactly still know what I want it to be.
So, like, do you have any ideas or do you don't want to put them out there? Or?
No, like if I had an idea, I would change
so
it.
So email Amanda at notquiteright.com with ideas for a story title.
Yeah, look, I guess I am accepting of the fact that if this book is ever traditionally published, like it probably won't be called what I call it anyway.
They'll just
change it.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, good, you give me your wisdom and you call it what you think will be marketable. Like I don't profess to have that expertise, I suppose. So I don't need it to be the perfect title.
So let's talk a bit about where this idea came from, where this desire to write in middle grade came from, and where specifically the idea of the book came from.
Okay, well, I guess I've often joked about myself that I never like sort of evolved beyond the age of 12. And I think my passion for writing really exploded at around that middle grade age, 10 to 12 kind of thing. I was a huge Babysitters Club reader and got my love of writing at that time. And I think in many ways, yeah, I'm still mentally 12. Like I love adventure. I love drama. I love all of the things that are prominent in middle grade fiction. Sort of appeals to me. And I guess I always aspired to kind of be like Anne M. Martin and inspire young girls and have that impact on other people that was had on me.
Yeah,
you know?
so it's a desire to like give back
Yeah,
that same
kind
experience
of.
that you've had.
Yeah, pay it forward, or, I mean, not that I profess to give people that love of fiction, but Anne M. Martin wrote in simple terms. She didn't even write all her books, as we've established before in a previous episode, but like just sharing that love, I guess, of writing with young people. Like that's important to me.
Okay. And specifically about this book, so where did this idea, like give us the elevator pitch.
Okay, well, I haven't practiced my elevator pitch. Maybe I should have. But
Well, you have a one-line statement of what the book is, right? Well, what you've said to me is it's Goonies for girls.
Yes, okay, yeah. It's the Goonies for girls. That's my aspirational statement, I suppose. It's set in an abandoned theme park, which is like an Aussie big thing, a bit like the Big Banana or whatever, but in this case it's the Big Fairy Bread. But it's abandoned and it's a treasure hunt through that theme park.
Yeah.
So that's a terrible elevator pitch, but for the purposes of this conversation, that gives you probably the basic information that you need to know. It was very much modelled on the Goonies. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you've seen the Goonies, the same kind of idea that they're going through this theme park, they're picking up clues and trying to find the treasure.
My favourite movies are all of those kids' movies from the 80s and 90s. And from a storytelling perspective, that's what's in my soul, you know, all these kids' movies and books and things from that era. And of course, I don't want to replicate something from the past. And it's not old-fashioned at all. It's very much a contemporary kind of story. But that's where my passion for it comes from, I guess.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the writing process here. Like, you know, what's the kernel? What's the little nugget that I guess started you writing? And you've said before you're a plotter. Did you kind of write the outline first and then before you put pen to paper, or how did you start this whole endeavour?
I guess the journey probably goes well before this particular one book. So like many people, you know, I always thought I had a book in me. I've always loved writing. I've written for fun for a long, long time, whether that be nonfiction or fiction. You know, we used to write bloody poems to each other when we worked together, just like that's what brings me joy, I guess. And so a little over 10 years ago now, I was turning 30 and I was feeling a bit like I was in a rut. And I decided I was going to do 30 things before I turned 30. And I asked some of my friends and family to suggest ideas of things that I could do before I turned 30. And there was lots of wild ideas in there. I did a lot of cool stuff that year. But one of them was write a book. And that was our mutual friend Dave, actually, who gave me that challenge. And so I guess that's what started it. Like, I think it would have happened one day anyway, but I think that was the time I'm like, nope, I'm going to knuckle down and I'm going to actually write this book. And in fact, I wrote not this one, but a different earlier evolution of this book in that year. I didn't quite finish it. I lost a bunch of chapters right at the end, but I got pretty close in that year.
And so that was this same story or some of the same characters? What elements, I guess, stayed the same?
So none of the same characters, the same setting, basically. This idea of this big fairy bread is probably the one thread that has woven through, and probably some of the themes and some of the character traits and so on, but completely different cast of characters. So in 2012 to 2013, I wrote most of it. And then in that period, I did a bunch of courses and I was learning how to write and listening to podcasts about it and reading books about it and trying to learn the craft, I guess. And, eventually finished a first draft of that book. And I was so proud of myself. And like most people who finished their first draft of a first book thought I was king shit. Like, oh, I'm so good. Like, I wrote this book. And of course, subsequently, you realize what a piece of shit it is. So that book is pretty bad, but, still a major achievement. And I learned a lot in that process.
And so that book didn't have this idea of like the treasure hunt through the theme park? Or
no, not at all. It was a completely different story. So in that book, it was about a boy band.
Okay.
And like
Called
winning.
Handsome.
Pretty much. No, it was modeled on a contemporary boy band, actually. So totally different plot to that book. Probably worth mentioning. So that's like a 5-year period. I mentioned 2012 to 2017, and I was learning and stuff. I was also like getting married and having babies in that time. So, huge chunks of time where I wasn't working on this at all. Yeah. But I pretty much thought about it like almost every day for all that time and was obsessed with the idea of finishing this book. But that was just life circumstances, I think, that dragged that process out probably a lot longer. Then from there, felt a bit lost after writing that because I knew it had a lot of big problems. I got some feedback on it and basically decided, look, I can't rework this. I have to start all over again with something new.
Yeah.
And so from there, I wrote a second evolution of this book. Again, totally different, completely different plot, different cast of characters, but that one fairy bread setting, still the same. And that was a lot quicker. That took me a couple of years to write that. And in the meantime, I also wrote half a YA that you've read as well. So I was very productive at that time. My kids were getting a little bit older, I guess, and I was finding time to write and be creative again. And then just as I was I had just basically finished the first draft of that and my life sort of got flipped upside down in 2020. And probably a lot of our listeners know this already. My husband had a major accident and became a paraplegic, and that was in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And so my life completely changed at that time. But I was just finishing this book and in fact remember very well submitting the manuscript to a competition, like an unpublished manuscript competition from the hospital carers accommodation while my husband was not in intensive care, but probably not far out of it in hospital. And that was not ready either, that book. It was called Ella's Master Plan, this one. So the first iteration was called, I think, Where with the Band. Again, cliche.
Yeah.
Second one was called Ella's Master Plan. And so it was Ella's Master Plan that I was submitting from the hospital. And life became very complicated very quickly. But regardless, I don't think that book was really right either. I think it was a lot closer. I got some really lovely feedback from some prominent people whose opinions I really valued. And in 2020, I should also mention I did another course where I met my writers group, the Coven, and we're still friends now. They're all based in the UK. I'm the one outlier here in Australia, but we are very close. We all share our work together. And they were among the first people I actually told what had happened to Andy. And we've remained close ever since and followed each other's journeys. So I guess it sort of fell away for a bit there. And I sort of didn't know what to do with it either. Like it had a lot of problems. I didn't have the creative energy to solve them. At the same time, we reconnected and we were writing flash fiction and entering competitions. And so that sort of, I guess, filled that creative need for me for a while, and it was sort of all I could manage at that time as well. So writing flash fiction for a couple of years. And then more recently, I started all over again. So I'm like, look, that book's gone. That was the past me almost. Like it's just such a before and after kind of thing. I couldn't get back into it I'd lost faith in the story. And so, again, started all over again.
So this is the third iteration of this story, and we're in the same setting. We're in the theme
setting
park,
has changed a bit. Like, it's changed, but it's still fundamentally the same thing. So,
but different characters now, and,
totally
and a
different
different
characters. Yeah, completely different plot. And I have to say that in that whole period where I was like struggling with reality, and some might say I still am. But that whole time I was thinking about this. The whole time I was obsessed with it. Like, I just want to solve this problem. I want to write this book. And so this plot, well before I started writing it, was something that I'd been forming in my mind. So I often joke like, some people say, I've written a book and, it took 18 months. That's a ridiculously long time. And I joke, well, I've been doing this for more than a decade.
Yeah.
And I have, but realistically, this book took under 2 years. And in fact, within that period, like, it was only spurts of time that I was given to the actual writing part. Like, I might get a month where I'm like, look, I'm knuckling down. I'm going to get up every morning and write this. But it wasn't every day for 2 years. It was in the time that I could find. And so they're probably all similar in that regard. It's probably taken me, the first one took longer, but probably around 2 years to kind of see it through. But yeah, and so now it is what it is now in 2024, and that's where it's got to. So that's the whole sordid tale of how we got here.
Yeah, so I guess 12 years roughly.
Yeah. But
3 iterations of this book plus one YA.
Well, half a YA.
Half a YA
Plus
adventure.
a bunch of flash fiction.
And a lot of flash fiction.
And a podcast.
And a whole lot of life changes over that time.
Yeah.
All right, so we're here with I won't say finished product, but at least a completed story. So going through that journey, what are the hardest parts that you found? What were the most challenging parts of writing this story?
This particular one?
Yeah.
Look, finding the time is fair to say, and finding the creative energy is a big one for me. Like, that's really hard for me to commit to such a big project. Probably the biggest challenge was that when I was plotting this book, which I did very, very thoroughly, very thoroughly plotted, at that time, I didn't know how it was going to end. And I had plotted it all the way pretty much up to the climax, and I had it all there, and I thought, you know what? The ending's going to come as I write it. It's going to make sense to me once I've written everything else. And guess what? That does not work. No. When you're a plotter, that does not work. You fall off a cliff and you go, oh shit, like, why did past me do that? I had this momentum going and then I just fell away because I didn't know. And I think maybe that was a red flag. And at the time, I very much saw it as a red flag. I did stop for ages and felt really like lost. And anyone around me at that time, including you, no doubt, would be like it was all I could talk about and think about. And I wanted other people to help me solve the problem. And I really just felt like it was a sign that this story was all wrong and there was no ending because it was wrong.
We did discuss this a lot. When we recorded the podcast, we'd speak at the end, like after we'd finished, and you'd say like, oh, I've got this problem, like I'm trying to get the characters from here to here, and what's the bridging step.
And I remember your response was always just like, just don't worry about it.
Just write it.
Just fucking write it.
Figure it out.
Was infuriating at the time, but actually really great advice.
In my defense, it wasn't always. Like, I feel like I gave some practical help. But yeah, I feel like a lot of your mental stress was on the practicalities of the plot. Like, how do I develop this aspect of a character, or how do I find like a compelling action to happen in this scene where, I don't know, a character develops from one state to another, like, and that has to happen in a compelling action. And like, not to jump too far ahead, and we're not going to go deep into the analysis, but I think you've done that really effectively in this story. Like, all of the plot elements fit together quite well and they flow from one to the next, and the character changes also come from the action in the story. Like, you don't read the story and go, oh, well, why did that person do that? It flows naturally from the action.
But that's what comes from plotting, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you've engineered all that to work. And that's where, like, I felt the ending, because it wasn't engineered, it just wasn't working. And look, I eventually solved it. I eventually got an ending that still needs work, but it was an ending I was satisfied with, that I felt ticked the boxes and so on. But definitely that was a huge, huge, huge wall that I hit in the writing process, and all because I didn't plot it at the outset. And I think it would have been, because I'm like that, I think it would have been much easier if I'd stuck with the plotting until I solved it. But then having said that, like maybe I never would have got there because I'd been plotting for years by the time I even started writing. And you get to a point where you're like, come on,
Yeah.
I'm overthinking it. I know that.
I haven't gone through this process, end to end, but like I feel in writing, you also learn things about the characters and how that they would react that you may not know up front. And you may have some assumptions about that and I'll just make this kind of work as a plot, but it's not until you actually get into the writing that actually these things start to come out of the woodwork.
And which I love. And that still happens, right? I think for me, absolutely. Like you're discovering things along the way and you get ideas along the way that you love and you're like, oh, that's so much better than what I had thought. But if you've got a plan, you can engineer that back into the plan much more easily. Whereas if you're just writing along, to me, like I don't care how other people do it. That's up to them. But for me, if I know where I'm heading and I say, oh, this character's doing this interesting thing that I want to explore, great. What will that look like at this plot point and that plot point? And I can actually play it all out so that then as I'm writing, it's already there ready for me to go. So like there's still room for that discovery, I think, in a plot-driven novel process.
Yeah.
For me, there is anyway.
Okay, so we're at the end of the writing process. It's taken you 2 years, I guess, for this iteration. What do you do next?
Well, what I do is I submit it to places well and truly before I should be submitting it anywhere because I'm just so goddamn sick of it. And I just want like some satisfaction, What I should be doing is thoroughly editing it. Yeah. Big picture edits, big stuff. But that's scary and I don't like that.
It's scary. It's a lot of time as well. It's a lot of work and it's also a lot of like questioning your prior decisions.
Yeah. I think 2 things. One is that I've never actually done that bit. I've now finished 3 novels in terms of a first draft, which is pretty big deal. But I've always chickened out on the editing part, which is pretty ironic because I think of myself as actually a better editor than writer. Yeah. And why would I miss that part? It should be fun and satisfying for me.
I think you've mentioned it. It's because you're sick of it and you're very much invested in the outcome. It's hard to have that critical eye.
And it is hard when it's your own to unthink things, like to unring the bell when something's happened. It's not that I'm necessarily attached. Like I'm ready to let many things about this story go. I don't need to have them. Like I've already let 2 whole plots and 2 whole casts of characters go. So I'm not averse to that. I think it's more like it's the overthinking part maybe, but also probably for me as a practical person, like I consider myself very efficient and I don't like the idea of endlessly editing something and changing it, but not necessarily improving it or improving my chance. I'll probably naturally improve it if I'm going to edit it. I could make some things worse and break parts by changing things that I'm scared to do.
Yeah.
But it's like, who am I editing it for? Because I know that if it was ever to be picked up by an agent or a traditional publisher, that they're going to want to change it again. And so there's a part of me that sort of thinks, well, if they can't see the potential as it is now and give me that feedback, then like I don't know how much more editing is going to get them over the line. And look, maybe that's just a bullshit thing I tell myself to avoid editing. But what I would love, if an agent were to pick it up and go, look, I see your potential. I see this story's potential. I love the basic idea, but here's all the things it needs. Then
you want some direction, right?
I'd whip it out. I'd go shut me in a room and I'd get it done because I know there's a goal at the end. Like I know what I'm working towards. But when you're sort of floating around on your own, it's like, well, yeah, I can improve the prose and I can maybe build the characters a little bit more or like whatever. There's a million things you can do to improve a story, but like for what reason?
Yeah.
Because someone might just come and delete that whole chapter or delete a whole character. Like why am I working on a character if they're not even going to end up in the final story? So I guess it's that little conflict that goes on in my head as well that sort of makes me unmotivated to do it.
Yeah, I can see that, but I also like to mitigate that a little bit. You've been up against that since day one. Like, why start it? You know what I mean? So nothing's really changed.
God. Why did I start?
Nothing's really changed since finishing the novel and editing it. You're still making those same decisions. So if I were in your position, I would just say, like, get it to the point where it's something that you think is great, like that you've worked through your own issues. And then, you need to hand over like that control a little bit or let go of that a little bit.
What?
When someone says,
How dare you?
"Oh, actually, let's change it." But if you want to get to a point where people are buying into it, then I think you need to get to the point where you've completely given it everything that you need to give it.
And look, that's what I know I need to do ultimately. And I have now shared this story with someone who I paid to give me a manuscript assessment, and I think she did a great job. And I didn't agree with everything that she said, nor would you expect to, but she had some really helpful, practical, actionable things that I could go and do. But I found that process a little bit discombobulating because while there was a lot of practical, actionable feedback that I agreed with, and I'm like, yep, no, you've seen into that there, that needs to happen, there was some other stuff that I guess I found kind of destabilizing in terms of my direction, like the bigger picture stuff. And this has come not just from this person, but another source as well, someone in the industry whose opinion matters if I want to get traditionally published, who are saying basically the message is age it down. Like, you know, like my language is too grown up for the target audience, which I accept as being a fact, right? If they're both telling me that, I accept that. And when I read it, I can understand what they're saying. One of them said that the voice is YA a lot and that I would need to scale that right back and consider my audience. Now, my problem with that is that I wrote it that way on purpose.
Yeah.
And in fact, my preference would be to age the characters up rather than age the voice down to match them. I accept there's a disconnect between my character age and the voice, which probably needs a lot of work anyway. But I feel like there's a bit of a gap between what we think of as middle grade fiction now, which is a little bit, to me, bubblegum, vanilla kind of stuff. Not always, but like the mass market stuff is.
Yeah.
And then YA at the other end that can be quite dark.
Yeah.
And there's a whole market of kids in the middle who want something that's not fully dark, but not kid stuff. Like it's somewhere in the middle. And the problem I think with traditional publishing is that they don't have a view of that. I mean, they never used to have a YA, right? That's a very new kind of field that has been taken up in such great speed because it was such a needed thing. Like there was a market calling for that. And I think there's a market between middle grade and YA. And I don't know what you would call it. I call it upper middle grade. But my characters, I've said they're 12. Like there's 16-year-olds as well, but I've said that the main character is 12. I want to age her up to 14. You don't read many books about 14-year-olds because it's expected that they will either be about 12-year-olds or that they will be about 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And you really just don't read many in between. And I think that's a problem. So while I accept the feedback about the voice not being right for a younger audience, I wasn't really writing it for that much younger audience because it wasn't just age it down. It was also this kind of make it more bubblegum.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like to me, The Goonies, for example, which I have used as inspiration, it's not bubblegum. It's pretty dark when you watch it, but it's not YA dark, right? It's kids dark. It's like The Body by Stephen King, but I've never read that. I only know it as the movie Stand By Me. That middle bit where there's some dark stuff going on and it's quite confronting actually. But we're not adults yet. We're still kids. Like we're still experiencing this world from a kid's perspective. So that's sort of, I guess, thrown me for a bit of a loop because I'm like, what am I doing? If I want to get traditionally published, no one's going to pick this up unless it sort of fits these expected categories. But I don't necessarily want it. I'm not passionate to fit that specific category, so it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally justifiable approach. Like, number one, kids do go through dark shit in their lives. And so why wouldn't they in a book? Like, kids don't always, and we like to think about kids living these fairy tale lives and being detached from reality, but that's not always the case. And it would be great if, art reflected their lives as well. And, number two is that you've got to write what you feel, write what you know, whatever. But what motivates you as a writer is to also express yourself and to say these things that you want to say. And like you said earlier, is to pay it forward or give back to younger readers. You want to do that in the way that feels genuine and honest to you. So as a reader of this story, I don't feel like I can comment on like the voice and that distinction between YA and middle grade fiction because that's not something I read. That's not something that I'm familiar with. So the tone to me felt appropriate, I think, in terms of that age group. And I think, I've got my own kids as reference and my kids are 10 and 12 years old. So they're in that age group, and I don't think that the writing is beyond what they can understand and what they can empathise with. I will say there were a lot of words, and I didn't note them all down. In fact, I didn't note any of them down, but several words that I, as a 44-year-old man, didn't know, and I had to look up. And so, I don't see a problem with that. Like, it might be a little bit of a problem from a literary agent going, oh, well, kids are just not going to get that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do want to be able to challenge kids as well to learn new things.
And you know what? That is actually another specific goal of mine. There's a word that I distinctly remember learning from the Babysitters Club, and they defined it right in the book, and I learned it from the book, and it's not a word I even use. But I remember that experience of learning a word.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's sort of in me this is how I've raised my children. Like, they had crazy vocabularies when they were toddlers because I would talk to them and never censor what I was saying in that sense. I would just speak using the words that I would normally use. But look, I can appreciate that I need to edit these words. Like, this is pretty much a first draft, right? Like, if there's words in there that don't fit the voice, great, I'll edit those out. But I'm not talking about words here and there. This is a bigger picture thing.
Yeah.
And I do accept her feedback that the voice is a bit old, and I think I could work on that.
All right, so you've written the novel, you've done some editing, you've gotten some feedback. Have you gotten an agent? Have you sought an agent? What's the next step?
Yeah, okay, so it would be based on your goal. My goal is traditional publication, although that goal is somewhat waning, I suppose. But I guess that's still there as my goal. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, in Australia, you don't have to have an agent. I think in other countries, sometimes it's you must have an agent. Here, you don't necessarily have to, but it would obviously open a lot of doors for you. There are other doors that open occasionally, like publishers will open for slush pile submissions, basically. So you can submit. You can submit to an agent. You can submit direct to publisher. You could obviously self-publish. For me, that's an option. It's not where I want to start. I'd like to see this thing through. I do need to edit it. I'm not happy with it as it is. I need to finish it till I'm happy, and then I need to put it out in the world and I guess try and fail and see where I go. We know a very, very small percentage of books are picked up. And so I feel like when I'm in that process of submitting, I would be writing something else, moving on. But I have already, like I said, preemptively sent it out to a few places before it's really ready. Just telling myself well, they either see its potential or not. I can edit it. Of course I can. They either believe in the fundamental idea or they don't. So I have submitted it to one agent, and I have submitted it to one slush pile open thing that only opens once a year. So I'm look, I'm just going to take the opportunity since it's there and I'll submit. And I've submitted it to one competition for unpublished manuscripts. And none of those were successful, probably because it's a first draft. But I'm just very impatient. So what I really need to do is whatever edits I'm going to do. And that's the question mark of what exactly am I doing? And I probably need some focused time where I just focus on that for a while. And that's one of my life challenges, I guess, is finding that focused time and seeing where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I guess on that topic then, let's get into my feedback and critique.
Must we?
And look, I'm not sure how to go about doing this, because initially I was like, let's go through chapter by chapter and kind of outline what happens. I don't necessarily want to do that. And, there's 20 chapters.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth at least talking about the first couple of chapters.
Okay.
And I'm happy to leave things out if you think we're spoiling it. I think probably the podcast audience is different from the book audience, right?
I hope so.
All right, so just as a little bit of an overview, we know it's in a theme park, but the plot synopsis, and I'll give my view of it. So we have Dot is the main character, the lead character, and her sister Nix. And they don't live in the theme park. They live attached to the theme park.
No,
right?
they're not even
or near
attached.
it. They're in the
Near
same town.
Yeah.
And the theme park was owned by her Aunt Faye. And Aunt Faye mysteriously disappeared. And since then, basically, the theme park has gone to shit because she didn't leave a will. And it's about to get bulldozed, right, for this new resort. And early on in the novel, Dot's mum, Opal, has sold their house as well to the developers of this new resort, right? So they're in a position where they're about to lose their house. They're about to lose this theme park that has been a part of their lives until Aunt Faye disappeared and they have to do something about it. And Dot is, like, her character is that she doesn't want to grow up. She's a child and she thinks that, like, the adult world is rubbish. She wears a ring that says, "Don't grow up, it's a trap." And that ring came from her Aunt Faye, right? So that's her character. And she's seeking out this treasure that she's heard mention of as a way to stop this all from happening, to keep the theme park alive and to keep the house, right?
It makes me very happy that you just got all that. I'm just sitting here going, yep, I'm happy.
All right. Is there anything else I missed? Anything you want to add?
No,
there are other characters,
obviously there's more to it, but no, that's a good summary.
Yeah, and so the characters we have are Dot and her sister Nix and her mother Opal and her dad, who is absent for most of the story but turns up at the end. We have Dot's 3 friends. So her 3 friends, Maddie, Ava and Cressida. And we have, like, the property developer who's known as Perky, Ian Perkins, and his, like, henchman security guard, Coot, as well as his daughter Sailor, as well as, like, her boyfriend and other friend and Nix's boyfriend. So we've got, like, a lot of characters.
There's a lot of characters.
There's probably a few that I've missed. Oh, yeah, there's the guy who lives down the street who's a bit creepy. What's his name?
Bert.
There's
a lot of characters.
There are a lot of characters. And, like, look, it is difficult getting into this book and working out who all the characters are. And I think that's one of the challenges that you have with that many characters. And we're talking about, 12 to 14 characters as a rough guess. And so in these first 2 chapters, we get really hit with all the characters.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if this is similar to what other people have said, but trying to make heads or tails who everyone is and what their relationship is to all the other characters is quite difficult in these first couple of chapters.
So some of the other feedback I had is basically more breathing room in the opening, and reading it back, I agree, big time. I think at the time there's all this pressure to just, like, hook people in and move quickly, right? So there actually was more breathing room, and I edited the book down quite a bit and lost a chapter at the beginning, I think, and sort of condensed things. So originally the friends were introduced in chapter 2 kind of thing, and it just felt a bit slow. And so there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere. And I definitely accept that feedback. I do think it needs more breathing room. And I guess it's my nervousness of that whole, like, cut to the chase, like, hook this is more about the actual publisher than it is about the children who are reading it. Kids who are reading it will give you plenty of time before they hate your book. They'll read the whole bloody thing before they decide they hate it. This is more about trying to hook a publisher. But of course, like, it still needs to make sense. So
I counted in the first chapter, there's 8 new characters.
Wow.
Like 8 characters. And I'm including Chester, the skeleton, as a character, because we open on Dot in her bedroom and she's talking to Chester, who's a skeleton, and you're setting up this idea of it's Halloween, right? Which is a part of the story that's, I guess, aside from the plot, but it's a very visual part of it, which I like actually in the story, the fact that it's Halloween and people are dressed up as sharks and they're dressed up as whatnot. It reflects their character a little bit, and it's also like a very visual thing that you can latch onto. All right, so 2 things that I think are potentially problematic. One is the mentions of Elon Musk, like given the political situation.
Yeah, I mean, this was written before.
What I think you should do is invent a billionaire,
just a different
pretend billionaire that
this
everyone knows.
This is the interesting thing. This was something I found very fun, actually, because you mentioned the Halloween thing, right? This is very self-indulgent, but one of the reasons why it's Halloween and they're all in costumes is because I have this dream that one day kids will wear costumes of my stories for, like, Book Week or whatever. This comes from me as a mother. How do you dress your kids up for Book Week? Nobody looks like anything.
Everyone is Harry Potter.
You're either where's Wally, which I'm sorry, no, or, like, generic Marvel character, which is not a book, or
Darth Vader.
Or Harry Potter character, right? It's very hard. And some people are very creative, don't get me wrong. There are some cool characters out there, but it's very hard as a parent to find a costume. And I'm like, listen, these kids are going to have the most recognizable costumes you can imagine. So that was part of it, just very self-indulgent motivation, but also intended to be quite fun and quite visual, very cinematic, like how these things look. It's not just kids in jeans and T-shirts or whatever. There's an element of drama to what they're wearing. And as you said, it is reflective of their personalities as well. So those costumes are used for other purposes as well. But one of the challenges for me was coming up with costumes that weren't owned
Yeah.
by anything.
Yeah, right.
So you may notice that none of the characters, apart from that one you've just mentioned who's dressed as Elon Musk, none of them are dressed as anything like from Disney or anything. And that was a fun experience trying to come up with good Halloween costumes that would be reflective of their personalities, but also not get me sued.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, Elon Musk, I guess it dates it as well, potentially, like when you start introducing real things into your world and real cultural references.
Yeah, and there are a few times you mentioned like real world things. Like you mentioned Teslas as someone who is environmentally conscious might drive a Tesla. And along similar lines is like, so the crypto forms a big part of this book. And you use Bitcoin specifically as the crypto that's
We
mentioned
haven't
in this book.
mentioned that part of the plot yet, so that might be worth explaining to people.
Yeah, I guess like the treasure that is found is crypto, which I think is a good modern twist on it. I think the use of Bitcoin specifically can be problematic for those same reasons because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I would make up a crypto like Blockcoin or something, you know what I mean? Like make something up
maybe.
that is a crypto that is not a real crypto asset.
I mean, I think that's easily fixed. So that would be, to me, the kind of decision where a publisher would make that call, and I'd be prepared to change that.
What I think you did really well here is vary the energy and the action through the scenes, right? So we're going through this theme park. Sometimes it's the whole group. Sometimes there's no conflict. They're all on the same page. Other times there is conflict between some of the characters. Then characters break away from other characters. There is always that change of mood and what the goal is. Like there's these short-term goals that change from chapter to chapter and different things that the characters are wrestling with. Sometimes Dot is wrestling with like, how do we solve the problem? Sometimes she's wrestling with, well, how do I get other people on my side to help because they want other things? And there are these conflicts that happen, and that is changing throughout the whole book to keep the reader interested, which I think is really great. All right, and so we get to the ending, which I think, ties everything up. I also felt it was very abrupt. Like it just ended. You know what I mean? Like it resolved and then it just ended.
So that was also feedback that came from this professional manuscript assessment. So well done. You're on that level. I should have just given it to you for free. But yeah, same thing, like more breathing room at the end and potentially having more of a, dare I say it,
A denouement.
to like show them enjoying where they've ended up.
Yeah.
So yeah, good call.
So like my main critique there at a high level is that opening is critical, and like if you fix that, I think that's 90% of it. Give it more space and that's it. But all of the things that you're worried about, like the plot and how to make the characters interact and how to develop that narrative arc and the change in the characters, I think all of that is actually there. So
Okay, so I've got a question for you then, because when I did read back over it myself, like there are parts of this story I love so much and I'm really proud of. And then there are parts that I'm like, I know that's got problems. But one thing that I guess struck me with my editor brain once I was coming back to it kind of cold after a bit of a break, and it's, I think, a reflection of like my evolution as well as a writer and things I've been focusing on more recently. Because of course I've learned so much over the years and I've tried to apply it. I think a lot of it would show through in my writing, what I have applied. But one thing I think that I'm yet to learn properly is about voice. And it's something that I can identify in other people's writing, and it's something that I need to work on, I think, in my own writing. And I think why it's front of mind for me is because I went to this Penguin Random House open day that they hosted at Writing New South Wales, and they were talking a lot about how that's what makes a slush pile story stand out is voice. They can fix everything else, but if you don't have a strong voice and a compelling kind of unique or something special about the voice in your story, then it's just not going to grab them enough. And honestly, I think that really sunk in with me, and I'm like, that's a really good point, because I think as a reader, that's what stands out to you. And I started thinking about it the last time we ran our comp, and that was really proving true to me. That voice is actually a really big part of it. And of course, voice is this kind of intangible thing that we try and like understand, and it's hard to engineer. It's not impossible, but it's hard to engineer. But reading back my story, I'm like, that is what I need to work on, really, because I think like a lot of the structural stuff, it can be fixed, but it's not the problem. The problem is this voice, and the voice is wrong because it's the wrong age, I guess, partially. But not just that, I could see how it wasn't really reflective of a young person's like thoughts and feelings. It was being projected onto them. And so that's something I can definitely work on. And I guess that came from me. That wasn't something anybody said about my story. But do you agree? Do you think that that is something that needs work? Because that stood out to me as probably a bigger issue than giving breathing room, which is kind of an easy problem to fix.
So voice in that way, I think like it can enhance a story, right? And it may not necessarily be like a make or break. Some stories don't have a very strong narrative voice, but they are also compelling for other reasons.
Great
right?
idea or something.
Yeah, but you can definitely enhance it. And one thing that I felt was, and maybe it's because there were so many characters, but it felt to me like a lesser close third person than like an omniscient narrator, right? Because we're dealing with all these other characters and we're not really in Dot's head a lot of the time. And if you want to bring that into her character and make that more about her character, then I think voice would play a big role in doing that. But at the moment, like, I don't know how you think about that narrative. Is it, if you think that's close third or if you think it's more of just a detached narrator type situation?
Well, and this is the thing. I think I probably just wrote it as third and wasn't thinking how close it could be. And I think I could make it much closer.
Yeah.
In previous iterations of this story, I think it was in first person in its first iteration. And a lot of people hate first person. Like they find it like very confronting. In middle grade, it's pretty normal. Yeah. And this is the reason, because that voice comes through more clearly if you're, speaking in first person. But I know, all writers have strengths and weaknesses. I think one of my weaknesses as a writer is a couple of things. Character development, I have to work on that. And I think I have worked on it in this, so I think I do have some character in there, but that's something I had to add. But also interiority, right? And that's something that's been picked up in my writing before in these like iterations of this book. And it's funny because we're always telling people to be less interior in our stories. And maybe that's just like so deeply ingrained in me that I'm scared to have any thoughts at all. And it's a problem because you need a balance. You need to be able, however you present that, you don't necessarily need to present it as direct thoughts, but to reveal what's going on emotionally and in the thoughts of a character. I think I missed that bit. And that was some feedback I got about this story. And I'm like, oh, that's something I keep doing. That's a problem. And all of those things I think work together. They're all voice, on some level. And if I could, for example, make it much of a closer third where all the language I'm using is the language I imagine her describing it as, which is not work that I've done. I think it's just me coming in as the narrator, and I think that's a problem. And if I changed it to be more about and I will age her up, I think she will be 14, a 14-year-old might think and say and do, maybe that would give me that interiority because it's out there on the page, like how she sees things, instead of it being stated more matter of fact what's happening. Like, I don't think it's not there. I think that it's there at times, but I don't think it's consistently there.
The voice thing is a tricky one, but I think you've got to hear it in your own head. Like, you've got to, when you write, you've got to hear that voice in your head in order to put that down on the page. And
that's what's tough. Like, I think in some aspects, like, there's humor in this book. That's my voice, and I like that, the humor, but I've given that to other characters. It's not really her. And maybe if I see that as a strength at times, that humor part, like if I gave that to her and if I made that sort of more her energy, I don't know. But like, I don't actually know how to think like a 14-year-old. That's the problem, especially a modern 14-year-old. So like, where does this leave me? Do I bother? And okay, here's part of this experience for me, right? So when I went to this open house, I spoke to an industry professional. She had read an extract of my work and she had some feedback on it. Some of the feedback was amazing. Like one of the first things she said was, I was thinking of the Goonies when I was reading this. I'm like, oh my God, biggest compliment ever. Like that's tick, 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 mission accomplished to me. But she had some other bigger feedback. Great, that's what I was there for. Things that were definitely fixable. And then I said to her, okay, so if I fixed all this stuff, can I submit it to you? Would you be interested in it? And oh my God, I've never seen someone get so awkward so quickly. Like she's just backpedaling massively and just like, oh, well, yeah, I guess. And like, just send it to the generic email address and I guess you can put my name in it. And I'm like, okay, like you can just say no. Please do me a favor and say no. But like, this is where I'm at, where it's like, okay, I could spend all this energy fixing this story For what?
Yeah.
For why? If it's still not right and if it's still not marketable, if this idea is not a goer, I've already spent enough time on it. Like, to what extent do I keep going? And again, maybe there's a little aspect of this which is me just avoiding editing it. But like, it's hard to get motivated to do that when you feel like it's not going to go anywhere. Like, what's the point? I could start on something else. And this other manuscript assessment I had, she's like, look, the setting's great. There's great things about it. I think this could work. But is that just you blowing smoke up my ass as well? Like, I don't know. Like, just someone tell me what to do and I'll do it. Like, that's how I feel.
Yeah. And you're never going to get that straight answer.
No. Well, here's the thing. So if your like major feedback is, look, it needs more breathing room here, it needs more breathing room there, and like we can tweak this and that. If that's your major feedback, like someone picking it up now should be able to know, can I make this work or not?
Yep.
And that's sort of been my mentality as I've sent it out a few places preemptively. You should be already able to tell, does this have legs?
Yeah.
And I guess the message I've got so far is that it doesn't. And that's why I'm like loath to kind of keep beating my head against a brick wall. And this is the same conclusion I came to with the first two iterations of this, which this is definitely the better of the three, as you might hope and imagine, but I don't know.
Here's the thing. You don't know till you do it, and you either want to do it or not. And my view is you've put a lot of time into it, and this sunk cost fallacy, but like you put a lot of time into it, and you would probably need to put in a little bit more just to get to the point, well, at least you know, like to the point where you've got something that's polished enough and you've taken on all the feedback and you've gotten to the point where like this is as far as I can take it. And beyond here, it's up to whether people connect with it.
Yeah.
Because I think at the moment you've got that view of, well, it's up to people whether they connect with it, but you haven't really taken it to the point where you're confident that it's where it needs to be. So, I mean, there could be another, I don't know, a few weeks, few months worth of work to
I don't think it's that
rework it.
much if I actually sat down and did it. Like when I say it's taken me 2 years to write this, like the amount of actual writing time is pretty small.
But when you get to that stage, then you can confidently say, well, now I'm done. And I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to worry about, well, have I done this? Have I not? Because I've got it to that point. And then you can just like spam people with it.
Yeah.
Like send it to everyone.
See what happens.
Then it's a numbers game. Like I send it to 1,000 people and like maybe one person will like it, maybe 100, whatever it is, it's out of your hands at that point. But now it's still in your hands.
No, I think you're right. And I think that's kind of the conclusion I've come to myself. Like I need to see it through. I think I probably would be frustrated with myself if I didn't do it. I think I've got to do it. I just don't want to.
I know.
Can you do it?
You spend a lot of time on it and at some point you just want to let the whole thing go. But yeah.
Not quite there yet.
Well, not to end on such a negative note of like, this is so hard and are we even going to get across the finish line kind of thing. We got some messages from your writers group.
Yeah, and this is the group I met online in 2020 when we were all doing a writing course together. And they've been with me through thick and thin. I've been with them through thick and thin. It's a diverse group of women writers doing all sorts of different wonderful things. I'm in awe of all of them, and I'm very, very lucky to have their support as I go through this. They've heard every whinge along this way for the past 4 years.
And they've all been on their own journeys.
They have,
of course,
and very different journeys, like all very different and different versions of success. But I feel like it's what keeps you going. For me anyway, like to have this community, to have people who believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. I don't honestly know how anyone would do it without that.
So let's listen to these messages. And like, although this journey is hard, you can tell that it's very rewarding. And so hopefully we haven't left you guys with a view that like it's too hard and don't even try.
Yeah, I think these messages are for all of us, really, all us writers.
Hi, my name's Jo. I'm from the north of England. My advice for those embarking on the road to publication is that while, yes, it can be long and painful, it can also be one of the most incredible adventures you'll ever go on. In 5 years, I learned how to write my first novel doing writing courses where I met my wonderful writing tribe. We were all at the same stage. We knew nothing, so we developed our craft together. We shared laughs, we shared tears, lots and lots of tears, as we experienced rejections from competitions, agents, publishers. There's literally no shortage of rejections. But, together we grew strong, we persevered, we got better at writing and submitting through helping each other. And we got agents. Me personally, I went through 2 agents before I decided to self-publish. We eventually won competitions, we got offers from publishers. And after all that hard work, I would say the thing that matters most is the experience of going on this journey with my writer friends, and meeting readers who love your work, and knowing that I made someone laugh and smile through a dark day is just incredibly rewarding. And it's how you get there and the fun that you have on the way and the people that you meet that's important, not what's waiting for you at the end of the road. Unless, of course, it's a massive Netflix deal. Good luck, everyone.
Hi, my name is Jess Popplewell. My debut novel, The Dark Within Us, came out in August of 2024 with Chicken House Books in the UK. And as a debut novelist, I would say always be aware that it is highly unlikely that getting a book published is going to change your life. You will probably have to keep your day job. If you can remember that and do this because you love it and not for the money, you're going to have a much better time of it. People do make a living from writing, but it's naive, I think, to believe that will happen immediately. So if you can remove that mindset from it and remember that it is going to be a long haul thing, you're probably going to have a better time, mental health-wise, overall.
This is Jane in the UK. What I want to say is write what you love, because that will be your North Star through everything you encounter on your writer's journey. And find your writing tribe. They will keep you sane when it gets tough and cheer you on with all your successes. They will help you to make your story better, and you will learn and grow as you help them. And thanks, Amanda. You're a great friend.
Julia Bergio here. When I wrote my first book, a rom-com about wedding photographers, I was lucky that I got an agent quite quickly. She then sent it out to publishing houses, and unfortunately it didn't find a home, which was when I learned the lesson that finding the agent is actually the easy part. I decided to self-publish. The marketing is hard, but I had a great launch and published 4 books in 2 years to finish off the series. Then I wrote a standalone Christmas rom-com, and an editor had early eyes on it and suggested I should try the trad route again. So I got another agent, and she's sending it out in January. I'm a glutton for punishment. If it doesn't sell, then I'll publish it in September. I guess the lesson I've learned is to keep moving forward. There have been a lot of tears and heartache, but my coven of close writing buddies are always there to cheer me on. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Good luck.
Hi, this is Farah Riaz, debut picture book author of The Twirly Wiggly Dance. My writing advice: it's okay to write out of order if the thought of going from beginning to end is putting you off. Just blooming write something. Anything is better than nothing.
So thanks, The Coven, for leaving us those messages. Very positive messages there. And it was great hearing all of your diverse accents as well. I really enjoyed that.
I am very, very lucky to have this tribe of women supporting me. I often feel like I am just a voice of negativity and drama in our group chat, but they always come in and save the day with their wisdom and their positivity. It's such a vibrant group, and I think this writing journey is one that you shouldn't be doing alone, basically. I don't think I would be here with 3 finished first drafts without the support of other people. Yeah. And, hopefully it turns into something else. But if not, at least I've made some friends.
So now it's my turn to recommend something to you. And we were just recorded our podcast trailer tonight when you mentioned that I'm always recommending you something super serious and boring.
I didn't say boring. I said highbrow. It's a compliment.
Well, today I'm going to go lowbrow. Actually, I think it's actually highbrow masquerading as lowbrow.
Oh, okay.
So you're a fan of the IT Crowd.
I am indeed.
And the
Big
Mighty
fan.
Boosh, I believe. You're a fan of the Mighty Boosh. I believe there's a blind spot in your TV viewing history, and that is a little show called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Oh, you've been threatening this for some time.
It's got all the same people in it.
Okay.
And this is actually 2004 TV show, so
dear.
20 years ago. And, times have changed. So is it going to have the same impact on you as those other TV shows may have had all that time ago. We'll soon see. But it's fun, but it's also, it's clever, and it's about writing. So,
Okay. I mean, you've sold me. Why didn't you tell me all this before? I would have watched it already.
So Garth Marenghi's Dark Place is a British sitcom, I guess you would say. And there was only 6 episodes made of it.
You also didn't tell me that my commitment was only 6 episodes.
So you have to
I'm
watch
all
them
over
all,
this.
and they're all 24-minute episodes, so you'll get it done in no time. Garth Marenghi is like a pulp horror writer.
Amazing.
So there's lots of writing-related little quotes in there that are a lot of fun, and I hope to start inserting them into the podcast as well once you've seen this show.
I just feel like this reminds me now deeply of Black Books because I'd been told for years to watch Black Books. And I'm like, oh, it sounds boring. And I had equated in my mind with Blackadder, which I don't get, and which is, let's not go there, but it's a thing.
You don't get Blackadder?
No, I don't. I know. My best friend for years has been trying to get me to watch Blackadder. Like for when I say years, I mean like 3 decades. And I just can't. And I felt like Black Books was in that category. And then I watched Black Books back to back to back to back and loved it. Maybe I should watch Blackadder again. Maybe I'll eat my words.
Blackadder's pretty good. Well, anyway, I'm not sure. I'm not certain that you'll love this.
No.
So this will.
You can go either way.
Question mark.
I have a big thing with British comedy, right? Where there is some British comedy that I love so much. Like I love it to death. I love Monty Python, but only some Monty Python. We can't throw a blanket statement over all Monty Python because some of it is just a weird drug-induced kind of thing I think you had to be there for at the time. But I love Mighty Boosh. I love IT Crowd. There's so many British comedies that are up there with my favourites of all time of like media. And then there's just others that I just don't get at all. And I don't know where the line is between those two things. Maybe this one will walk the line. I don't know.
All right. Well, I look forward to talking about it with you. And that about wraps it up for this episode of the Not Quite Right podcast.
This bonus episode.
This special bonus regular episode of the Not Quite Right podcast. So we'll be back, no doubt, very soon with some more actual bonus episodes of the podcast, talking about the Not Quite Right prize. And until then, right on.
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 Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
And you can get people on board with you. Holy fuck, the cicadas.
Yeah, I have to shut that
Now
up.
the cicadas have started. It's cicada rooting season. It is like a 1 in 400 year, like massive gangbang out there. That's insane. Oh my God.